what's up? Oh, this is a bit high. Let me get that adjusted. Hey, everybody, I am finally back. So I had a procedure done. It kind of put me out of commission. So I had an old video a couple weeks ago, and then last week I just was still not really up for doing this. So I'm back. I think that's my first break in 6 months since starting this. So my first extended break, I guess you could say. So I am back. I've had a bunch of new subscribers since Kane B and I don't know if you saw it, but Kane B and I did this sort of a tier list for, I know some people think that's cheesy or stupid. It's a kind of a artificial way of ranking things that could be a bit goofy, but hey, it made for a fun context, and it was still helpful to try to organize them. But basically what we did is we discussed the various sort of prominent arguments for non-naturalist accounts of moral realism, and we tried to go through and sort of organize and arrange them in terms of what we thought compared to the rest at least, the strongest arguments for moral realism were, and then we sort of worked our way down to what we thought the weakest arguments for moral realism were. Now, this just covered non-naturalist realism. I'm sure that there were a few arguments that were left out, and that, with any of these arguments, they're really kinds of categories of arguments, and different philosophers that have different versions of the same argument. But we did our best. I was about to just say, oh, and surprisingly, this particular argument made it to the top of the list. We did that thing with like S, and then you go through like A, B, C, D, E. Is that all of them? And maybe there's F tier. So like the tiers of the S tier being, so there's only one that made it to the top of the list. So you'll have to watch the video to find out. I do think it'd be cool if we could just construct a list like to make it available for people. But yeah, definitely check that out. We've been discussing if we're going to do another tier list one. We might do ones for ranking fruits. I thought that would be fun. It has nothing to do with meta ethics, but we can do whatever we want, because we're not under contract with some company or something. If I want to rank fruits, I'll rank fruits. So we might do that, and it could play into the whole gastronomic realism thing, which I frequently bring up pretty well. So I already see a few comments popping up. So let me have a look at those. I don't recognize the name, but hello and hi, welcome. I said hi to myself. Apparently, I already forgot that I did that, so that I was just clicking on the next one, and I'm like, oh, that was me. All right. Hi, Lance. Glad you're feeling better. Yeah, I am feeling better. You know what? Maybe I'll get into what I did, but I don't feel like doing it now. But it is also going to limit how much I could talk for a while. So I'm not going to be around as long today. I know sometimes I go for 3 hours, and it's not going to happen today. Although I will be able to skip a break today because I got my drink. If you're wondering what this is, well, I'm not going to leave you to guess. It's limeade. So I really love limeade. I don't know if it's my favorite drink. So my favorite drink is like, I don't know what you call it, but just basically like watermelon juice. So that's my favorite. It says watermelon is the best fruit. See, I'm already giving spoilers for when we do the fruit tier list. But for me, watermelon is the best fruit. But I guess if we ever do that video, you'll have to watch to see where all the other fruits fall for me. And Kane we're not going to come to any agreement on that. So what I can say for the rank list that Kane and I did is that generally through discussing it, we came to a lot of consensus. Maybe if we had privately constructed our lists, they would have been different. But for fruit, there is no reconciliation. But since I have intuitive access to the stance-independent gastronomic facts, I do in fact know which fruits are objectively better than other fruits. And watermelon is definitely the best fruit of all the fruits. If anyone disagrees in the chat, I do not care. You are objectively incorrect. And I simply have intuitive access to those facts. Now, if you're wondering, like, how would I have intuitive access to the facts and you don't have this intuition that watermelon is the best fruit? Unfortunately, that just means you are conceptually impoverished. You just don't have the concept that would allow you to recognize that watermelon is the best fruit. And I think that if we begin a discussion about which fruit is best, we should start with what's intuitive to me as the default. So if you want to argue that watermelon isn't the best fruit, you're going to have to present me with defeaters, in other words. And if you don't have sufficient defeaters, which I could already tell you, any defeaters you present, I will just reiterate, any argument against watermelon being the best fruit isn't as plausible as watermelon being the best fruit. So really, you're not in a position here to disagree with me and be justified in doing so. You could be incorrect if you want to persist in being incorrect, but anyway, I'm being a little too ridiculous. All right, so we have Um, I realize how it is a bit strange. I think I mentioned, so this is Joe Schmid from the channel Majesty of Reason. I mentioned you, Joe, to people, and I mentioned you to someone, and I said, oh yeah, you know, Majesty of Reason, and they were saying blah 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 blah, and they were like, you can't call Joe Majesty of Reason. Like, what do you call him, Mr. Majesty or what? Like, it was ridiculous. But I did realize that it is a little strange to call you Majesty of Reason. No one calls me Lance Independent. That would be weird. They just call me Lance or Lance Bush. At least that's one good thing about Lance Independent. I'm not like, Bush isn't a cool sounding name. I don't get to have a cool name, you know? So I wish I had a better sounding one, but that's what I got. So that's what I'm sticking with. But yeah, anyway, so I've probably mentioned this a few times, but Lance Independent is a play on words. Lance Independent, Stance Independent. So Stance Independent is the typical term that is, well, I say typical, but it's really saying increasing usage since I think about the 90s is the far back I was able to trace the origins of the word first emerging with any prominence in the metaethical literature. In any case, there's no, who cares about the etymology of technical terminology in philosophy, but it's play on words for stance independent. Stance independent is typically this characteristic that distinguishes the types of moral norms that moral realists believe in, as opposed to moral anti-realists, which may believe in some type of stance dependent moral facts, or they might say that there are no moral facts, or they might say, you know, who knows what they would say. But at the very least, what makes someone an anti-realist is that they don't think that there are stance independent moral facts. So I went with Lance Independent. So someone recommended this to me. They were like, hey, how about you go with that? And I thought it was a great pun. So that's where the name comes from. But yeah, I got to just call, is Joe Schmid okay? Can I call you that? It's just because I realized if in my head, you're Majesty of Reason, which I think sounds really cool. But I don't know. Wait, did you say anything? You didn't even say, are you? So Joe might be popping in here, always says something about unrighteousness and truth suppression, and then just leaves. I don't see any other comments. I know you're super busy with working on stuff. So maybe that's a good reason to not stick around and be super active in the chat. Or maybe you're off to, so when I'm listening to a lot of streams or when I'm trying to talk to people, I'm always like doing dishes or something. And then people are like, Lance, are you there? And then I'm not there. But so that's what I do. I try to get stuff done. Anyway, so let's move through some other people commenting on stuff. Greetings, Lance. Hope the surgery was smooth. It was. It actually overall went better than expected. So yeah, so that's a good thing. I'm probably going to need a couple more. They're expensive. They're one thing I will say is a lot less painful than I expected. There was a minor complication that was resolved without really an issue. The recovery period is like mega super duper long. It's like literally months, like 3 to 6 months total. So, but fortunately, I could do most things in the meantime. Stephen Thomas is here. Hey, how's it going? All right. All right. Is this a good time to discuss my concerns with some forms of anti-realism, or should we leave that for a future stream? So today I'm only going to be going for about an hour. So we've only got about, I would say, 45, 50 minutes before I got to start wrapping up. So today is not the best day. I think what I'll do is I'll just start increasing the time. So next week, maybe I'll do an hour and a half. And then the week after that, a couple hours. And then by then I should be good to just go as long as I feel like. I think if you're okay with it, because I did have somebody coming here and they wanted to get in the stream. And this was back before I hadn't finished up my PhD and I was like really busy and whatever. I don't have good reasons, but they popped in. They were like, I want to get in the stream. And then they didn't. And then I haven't seen them in the chat again. So as long as you're going to be here over the following weeks, I think it would be better to do it for another week, because if we start doing it now, I'll probably have to cut off the conversation partway through. And I think that would be unsatisfying for me and possibly for our audience. I don't know. Because today I wanted to talk a bit about the halfway fallacy. But, you know, I kind of use the thumbnails that I provide as a bit of like a starting place for the conversations. And I might be able to get through that pretty quickly. Often that doesn't happen though. But anyway, I do think a later period would be better, because I think we would have more time. And I wouldn't have that anxiety of the looming deadline where I could just talk as long as I want. Does that sound good to you? Well, I guess I'll wait and see. And just dropped a notch watermelon is gross. Yeah, see, so like that's incorrect. It's the best. Why is it gross? What facts about watermelon make it gross? I mean, it tastes good. And like, then what else do you need? How could it be gross? All right. Great to see you. I don't know if you're referring to me or somebody in the chat, but great to see you. Welcome. Oranges are objectively the best fruits. Well, you'll be happy to know that the first thing I put on the list of stuff to get for the next set of groceries is oranges. And we got pineapple coming up. And what other fruits we got on the way? I don't remember, but definitely oranges. Oh, limes, because of limeade, obviously. Okay, that is just your preference. Well, it is my preference, but that's coincidental. Watermelon is, in fact, also objectively the best fruit. So anybody that's not eating watermelon isn't choosing the correct one. Yeah, I'm a watermelon presuppositionalist. I got another hi. Welcome. I know we haven't talked in a while, so, good to see you. Awesome. Greetings from Manila. So hi to you as well. All right. Stick around for a few more streams. And if for whatever reason I wrap things up in like 10, 20 minutes, I'd be happy to try to drop a StreamYard link, even if we talk for 20, 30 minutes. It might even be good to break it up, and have different sessions and process what we say and get to it. So I can't promise to shoot for that today. It just depends on how long it takes me to get through the halfway fallacy thing. So a few other things to mention, I'll mention them again. I know for those of you that have been with me for a while, it might be a bit repetitious, but I am trying to grow my channel. So I got something like 150 new subscribers since I think the last time I did this. So it's a lot more people. I'm approaching 600 people now. So I want it to grow. So share the video if you want. Let people know about it. Do all that stuff. So I did start a Discord. I've had that for a little over a month now. So you're welcome to join the Discord. I'm really trying to curate it and keep it a less chaotic in there. I really just want high quality discussions. And the Discord really is about discussing the types of topics I like to talk about. So we got meta-ethics, metaphilosophy, consciousness, free will. We got stuff in there for pragmatism. I just added a new channel for existential risk. I know I don't talk about that much on the channel, but that's like an interest of mine that I've tabled for quite a few years. So if you like that, you could hop in there. We got a lot of people that like talking philosophy there, so you're welcome to join. The link is in the description for the video. I don't know where else I have it, but you should be able to find it. I hope it's the permanent link and I didn't put one of those 7-day expire things. If I did, please let me know in the chat or the comments if the link doesn't work. But you're welcome to join the Discord. When you get in there, there'll be this intro and rules thing. Please go over those rules, and then there'll be like you could react to that, like hit the check mark, and then you'll be able to access the rest of the server content. So we have kind of a general chat where you just kind of talk about whatever. If it gets too specific, like if you're talking about meta-ethics for 30 minutes, I might drop in there and say, hey, move it over to meta-ethics. And then we got a bunch of focus channels where it's topical. And then there's a voice chat. You're always welcome to drop in there. You're also welcome to ping me. And like, if you want to see if I'm up for voice chat, I don't always just lurk in there. One thing that can happen is if I'm sitting in there, everyone wants to join and try to talk to me at certain points of the day. I'm not saying I'm that popular, even on my own server. But yeah, so that's a community I'm trying to build to support the channel and the blog. The other thing, I've mentioned this a few times before, and it is growing, so that's awesome. I did move my blog over. So this initially started as a blog, and we're almost coming up on a year. It might be a year by now. I don't remember if my first blog post was July or August, but the blog is by far the thing that I do the most work on. And it is also, out of all of my work, by far the thing that there's like the least interaction. So very rarely does anybody comment on there. But do feel free. If you see the blog posts, please drop a comment. You could like them. If you hate it, you could comment about how you hated it, whatever. But yeah, so the blog is now on Substack. So it should be like lanceindependent.substack.com. I got to do the custom URL thing to move the old URL over there. So I will do that. Okay, I'm also going to bore the heck out of people 15 minutes and not even getting into the topic. So do I believe in phenomenal conservatism? I would say that I'm agnostic about phenomenal conservatism. I have raised several concerns. I think it's my most viewed post on my blog is, I think it's called Epistemic Blank Checks and the Heat Death of the Universe. In fact, let me post that here. In fact, I will post just the Substack itself. So here's the Substack. And you could subscribe there. Anyway, so I had been mentioning that this is the most active. I got blog posts like scheduled up for a couple months. So there's going to be a lot more content on there. I did finish up my series called the Phil Papers Fallacy, where I argue it's not just about the Phil Papers survey, which I talk about on the channel all the time. It's more generally about appeals to philosophical expertise. So I'm very critical of the claim that philosophers are experts and that we ought to defer to their expertise. And that's largely because I think in order to be an expert at something, that you need a good method. Like the methods you use to arrive at the conclusions you arrive at need to actually work. So in a certain sense, like someone could be an expert about astrology. They might know a lot about its history. They might know a lot about, what predictions, particular, astrological readings would entail were astrology to work. But you can't be an actual expert at like making accurate predictions of astrology, because astrology doesn't make accurate predictions. It doesn't work. So in at least one respect, you can't really be an expert in astrology any more than you could be an expert at like conjuring demons, because no one can do that. And so if particular methodological presuppositions are implicit in one's methods when doing philosophy, and this isn't to say everybody doing philosophy uses terrible methods, but let's suppose there's a subset of philosophers that are using a method that doesn't work. Okay, well, just like astrology, you can't really be an expert in that sense, an expert of like actually deploying a legitimate method to reliably make accurate predictions or arrive at true conclusions or something. If you're using a bad method in philosophy, method that doesn't give you, reliably, maybe you're lucky, true beliefs, then you're in a certain sense not really an expert. And so I think before we presume that philosophers are experts, we first have to really understand the methods that they're using and establish whether those methods work. Unfortunately, I think that one big asymmetry between analytic philosophy and especially more a prioristic, non-empirical approaches, these days, largely philosophers will make claims like that they're appealing to intuitions. Although I think that there's a lot of issues even with that claim. Like, what does that amount to? How often do they do that? Is that true? What exactly are intuitions? Are there different kinds of intuitions? Are some intuitions reliable and others unreliable? I find it implausible that all intuitions are reliable or no intuitions are reliable. Maybe some are reliable and some are not. But there's a psychological story to tell. And I don't think that contemporary analytic philosophers have done anywhere close to sufficient work to lay out a clear, comprehensive, and you could say a taxonomy of what intuitions are and how they work and how they map on to our best understanding of contemporary cognitive psychology. For the same reason, if there was a person that was proposing this additional sensory capacity that people had that purportedly employed features of like the way that the brain functions, and they're like, yeah, no, you could sense this other stuff in the world. You could see things, you could hear things, you could smell things, you could taste things, and then you have this other sense. And then you say, okay, well, which is there some sensory organ on the body that's picking up this information? What kind of information is it? How does that information fit into our models in physics? If you can't answer any of those questions, people would, and I'm not saying philosophers are doing exactly this, but if someone was actually purporting to have established there's this extrasensory capacity, but then they couldn't tell you anything about how it worked or which parts of it, which mechanisms in the brain? Is it using the occipital lobe? Is it using the ventromedial prefrontal? Like, which neurological systems are distinctively activated when employing the sensory system? If someone goes, I don't know to all of those questions, well, they don't really have much of an account. They have an account like in theory, but they're not really doing much to deploy it. And I think that the way that philosophers use intuitions is, one, there's no consensus. And then two, it's just, I think, grossly underdeveloped, psychologically speaking. Anyway, so do I reject so I'm agnostic about phenomenal conservatism. I think, I do know people, I have friends and colleagues, people that I think might be right if I were to really dig into the arguments and reasons that they present. There might be problems with phenomenal conservatism. I suspect if I were to investigate it, I would reject it, but I don't currently reject it. My problem with phenomenal conservatism isn't that it's the correct or incorrect epistemological approach, but that I think that it's dialectically kind of inert. It doesn't get us very far. So all phenomenal conservatism can do is provide you with some sort of private justification. And maybe that's interesting or a value to you if you're trying to make decisions or navigate the world. But when I'm engaged in a philosophical discussion, what I'm trying to do is, update my views, to possibly change my views in response to what someone else says. And the comparison I've made in the past with respect to phenomenal conservatism is that your seemings provide a private justification. Now, they provide a sort of second order or secondary sort of residual information for me. So if you are really confident about something, that is some evidence to me that it's true, but it's nowhere near as good as the evidence that it would be if you had private access to that, your seeming itself. Like, in other words, I don't have direct access to your seemings. It doesn't seem to me like whatever it seems the way if it seems to you it's a certain way, it doesn't necessarily seem to me that it's that way. And so to the extent that it seeming to you justifies your beliefs, it doesn't that doesn't apply to me because it doesn't seem to me that way, unless it incidentally seems that way to me as well. But then it's my seeming. It's the fact that it seems that way to me that's doing the sort of epistemic heavy lifting there. It's not the fact that it seems that way to you. So the fact that something seems a particular way to someone else just isn't particularly, it's not super compelling to me as a reason to believe something. So, if Mike Humer shows up and says, hey, I consider these various sorts of scenarios or moral cases or sentences or whatever, and it tends to come out of those that it seems to me that moral realism is true. Well, okay, maybe it does. But it doesn't seem that way to me. And so if it seems to you something is a certain way, it seems to me that it's some other way, that itself isn't going to resolve anything. Not that I think Humer thinks that that's decisive or, dissolves anything. My concern with phenomenal conservatism then is not whether or not it's true, but how people typically employ it in practice, which this is why I mentioned that article. In fact, I said I was going to pull it up and then I didn't do it. So let me go get it. Which I call this idea of the epistemic blank check. And so the issue with this is that, let's say, and I'll give you a sort of narrative that will happen. If, let's say someone says, hey, it seems to me that God exists. And then I'm justified in believing in God in the absence of defeaters. In other words, reasons to not believe in God, to believe some alternative inconsistent with the existence of God, to undermine my belief in God, and so on and so forth. If you give me good arguments against the existence of God, maybe I'll go, okay, well, it seemed to me that God exists, but given these arguments, I think the evidential weight of the arguments outweighs those evidential weight of my seeming. And so now I'm just going to be an atheist. I don't believe God exists. So that is presumably how the principle is supposed to work. But in practice, you'll often hear things from realists like, look, any argument against moral realism will have premises that are less plausible than the truth of moral realism. So, how they know any argument, but without having seen it, isn't going to have more plausible premises. I don't know how they know that, but okay. It seems a little presumptuous to me. But the problem here is just that how much weight is your seeming? It seems like, and I'm using that language, although I don't know that I'm using it in quite the same sense. But in any case, it seems to me, at least, that a lot of the people that will employ this sort of language can employ their seemings as a sort of evidential, like I've said, a blank check. Sometimes I've said like a fudge factor. So you could weigh up all the evidence for or against something, and even if it comes out even, your seemings, you could just come in and put your thumb on the scales and say, okay, I win. And the problem is that it allows for a kind of arbitrary amount of goal shifting. So the narrative I've given is something like this. Someone comes along and they say, hey, it seems to me that God exists, and I'm justified in believing that in the absence of defeaters. It's phenomenal conservatism. And then a critic comes along and says, okay, well, here's a defeater. Here's an argument against the existence of God, the problem of evil, whatever it is that they present. And then you can respond by, you could maybe have objections to the argument. Say, it doesn't work. The argument's invalid. The argument, I don't think it's sound because I reject premise 3 or whatever. You could do that. Another thing you can do is say, look, I accept that some sort of like evidential problem of evil argument, but however much that serves as some evidence against the existence of God, I don't think you quite understand how strong my seeming is. It's not just that it seems to me that God exists. It super duper seems to me that God exists. And so you're going to need to present a better defeater. It's just not good enough. So you started out here. Here's the evidence in favor of God, no evidence to the contrary. Okay, let's say you were justified in believing in God. You have some reason to believe in God and no reason not to. So why wouldn't you believe in God, right? Okay, so someone comes along and they present a defeater. And so now you would think, you go, oh, okay, well, I guess I don't think God exists unless I've got some additional arguments on top of my seemings. But you don't have to do that. You could just say, if they present at this level, you could go, I don't think you understand. It super seems to me that God exists. So you're going to need to have better defeaters. So they present more defeaters. And then you can say, I don't think you understand. It super duper seems to me. It's up here. So you're going to have to do better than that. And then they get more defeaters. Now this person has spent years of their life toiling away, coming up with arguments against the existence of God. And they present them to you and you go, you're really not getting this. I don't think you understand. It's super duper mega ultra to the max, seems to me, that God exists. And all these defeaters you're presenting, look, they're very good arguments, right? They all provide evidence against the existence of God. I actually agree with you with their evidential force. If I didn't have seemings, I wouldn't believe in God. These arguments are super powerful, but it really seems to me that God exists. So unfortunately, your arguments aren't good enough. I'm still justified. And this is what people do this in real time. I have conversations with them. This is what people do with, what's supposed to be phenomenal conservatism becomes a type of phenomenal dogmatism where it's just nothing can override their beliefs. They're the sole arbiter of whether your defeaters are good enough to override the justification they have on the basis of their seemings. So seemings seem to have this sort of a arbitrary evidential weight. It's unspecified. It doesn't come in units, and they could just claim it's whatever value they want. And that's a problem. I'm not saying anybody that depends on, appeals to, or endorses phenomenal conservatism does this, nor do I think that even if they did, that they would think it's okay. They might realize, oh shit, I am doing that. I shouldn't do that. I am just being kind of arbitrary here. Maybe I acknowledge that. So this is not a critique of phenomenal conservatism. The critique is that if you're going to opt in to phenomenal conservatism, you need to be mindful of the fact that some people are just using it as just another way of saying, hey, I have arbitrarily strong priors in favor of a view. And so no matter how much Bayesian updating I do in response to the evidence, tough shit, it's not enough to get over my prior. So if I had a prior of 0.99999999999 that something was true, then, all the evidence in the world, it could just be there could be people lined up, wrapped around the sun 100 times. And every second of every day, I have a supercomputer process the evidence and update. And if your prior is sufficiently high, you would have the heat death of the universe before anybody convinces you you're wrong. And are you justified if you happen to find that you have a prior that high? I mean, can we ask questions about how to calibrate these priors? Why is the prior so high? Part of my concern here is that often what this seems to come down to is that when a person is reporting this sort of de facto incorrigibility about their beliefs, they're treating it as some sort of dialectical, victory on their part, as though they win because you can't override their belief. But if I happen to be psychologically disposed that I'm just recalcitrant in the face of evidence, why should anyone else find that to be, dispositive of anything other than quirks of my psychology? And this is my worry with appeals to phenomenal conservatism. If it turns out, and I always, not always, but most of the time, put this in the context of moral realism, that moral realists are just like, look, I super duper think realism is true. And you could present arguments all day long. I'm not going to change my mind. That's why we should all be moral realists, because moral realists are super incorrigible. Okay, but why are they incorrigible? So I think if we're dealing with a community of people that vary in what priors they have or how incorrigible, or at least recalcitrant, like maybe not literally impossible to persuade, but very difficult to persuade, I think we need to ask some empirical questions about why they are that way and why, for instance, I'm not that way. With respect to being incorrigibly a moral realist, I could be an incorrigible anti-realist. So I only mean I'm not that way in the sense of I'm not an incorrigible moral realist and they are, or at least are like a highly recalcitrant one. And maybe I'm a highly recalcitrant anti-realist. And so then how do we resolve that dispute? If one person has the super high prior in favor of realism, I have a super high prior in favor of anti-realism. And then we examine all the evidence and, for a billion years, and we're both operating with the way our prior, we're updating properly. I'm still going to be an anti-realist. They're still going to be a realist. What do we do? So I see phenomenal conservatism as the tip of a much deeper problem, which is this sort of there might be psychological facts about people's dispositions, and I don't know what kind of role they should play in the ongoing philosophical dialectic. And one of the reasons I am so keen on arguing against the presumption that most ordinary people are realists is that a lot of the times I think when you enter into a discussion with realists, or when they're discussing moral realism, there's a presumption that even anti-realists actually find the realist view intuitive, and that they assigned different evidential weight to the arguments against realism. Like they thought the defeaters were better than they were. And so really we all are in roughly the same starting point. We all find realism intuitive. And then some of us move away from it in response to arguments, perhaps because we assigned incorrect weight to the merits of those arguments. And I think that is typically how the realist anti-realist debate has been framed, at least in contemporary metaethics. And I just don't think that that's true. And I think if you go out and you talk to people that are working outside of contemporary metaethics, or maybe they're not working in philosophy at all, I think you'll find quite a lot of them don't have these strong realist intuitions, and might even have strong anti-realist intuitions. And I think moral realists just haven't really grappled with that. Okay, so I said a lot there. Let's move on. And I do want to get to this halfway fallacy thing. And let me get the epistemic check paper first. Well, not a paper. Should write a paper on it at some point. Where is that? This should be way back in my archives, I guess. Still looking for it. Was it really that long ago? It was. Yeah, I wrote this back in October last year. All right, I got it. And I will post it. Boom. There you go. So check that out. That is, I think, my main post talking about phenomenal conservatism. Let me pin that. There we go. All right. So check that out when you get a chance. It's now pinned. And then I should post the blog post for today. Is it in the description of the video? I hope so. It is not. Okay, so I'll have to look for that one. That one's a little more recent. While I do that, let me try to look at some other things people have said. Looks like you're suppressing the truth of astrology and demonology and unrighteousness too. Okay, so more jokes. All right. I think most philosophers might say that the same reason is capable of intuiting moral and epistemic truth. I mean, maybe I don't. I mean, I would need more context to assess that. Why would a moral anti-realist follow their savings at all? I mean, why wouldn't they? I don't know if there's any sort of moves that are available to realists that aren't also available to anti-realists. But if someone is relying on phenomenal conservatism and is an anti-realist, then they are relying on a categorical reason that PC is true. I don't think that that's true. I mean, PC is it by definition a normative realist notion? I don't see why. And even if it were intended to be, someone could just always make the move of saying, then I endorse some anti-realist analog. So I don't think that would be a big problem. Hey, what's up? Sorry, I didn't get to this for 5 or 6 minutes. I'm quicker than I was in the past. I used to respond to people like an hour later. So yo to you as well. If you want to jump in the stream or the other person does, maybe I'll pop that up for like 20 minutes or so. But I want to get to this halfway fallacy thing. But okay, cool. So you're raising some of your concerns. I guess you would be first if you're around. All right. There might simply be disagreements that cannot be resolved through argument. I don't think it's necessarily a huge problem in general. I don't think you could prove any metaphysical truth. You might be right about that. I mean, it's not a problem in the sense that it means that we must be mistaken about something. It might just be humans can't always be persuaded. There's just going to be some psychological barriers. It doesn't mean the arguments aren't worth having. I think in the best cases, arguments can help both parties understand their stances and where their intuitions come from. Maybe so. There are all these potential residual benefits. It's also possible that if you're having these conversations around others, that other people are moved or persuaded in a particular direction. So two completely incorrigible people can still move audiences around. Oh, did my washing machine go off? Because I didn't hear it because of the headphones. Yeah, it's a Samsung, I think. So maybe that's why you heard the same sound. Okay, so we got three or four? No, just one person that wants to talk, and then you as well. So that's 2 people. All right, we got someone else here. Can you root objective morality and physiological needs, food, water, enough rest, shelter? All rules or shoulds that go against these needs are bad, and those that satisfy them will be good. Yeah, so this sounds like it might be some type of oh, now I hear it. Sorry about that. We had a lot of work to do today, so give me a second. All right. So yeah, this sounds like it might be some type of naturalist account. I don't know if this would necessarily be some type of teleological account, but maybe some type of naturalist account. So the typical thing I say about these is not necessarily that they're false. It's really going to depend precisely on how the naturalist realist is characterizing the view. And again, I don't know if the view you're offering is a naturalist view or not. But if someone says, hey, if you're grounding objective morality in physiological needs and you have these shoulds, and you say, okay, well, If you take an action that goes against getting enough shelter or getting enough rest, like if you do something unhealthy or something that will cause you physiological harm or undermine your reproductive fitness or something like that, we could call that bad and you shouldn't do it. What I would then want to know is what is added. So like, let's say, for instance, we just take the fact that if you, like, we could say you should drink water. And if I say, what do you mean by that? You say, okay, well, it's generally conducive to your health or your well-being or continuing to be alive to drink water or something that is going to hydrate you. Okay, I agree that that's true. Like, it is consistent with staying alive to be hydrated. It is consistent, like, with being a healthy human being to drink enough water or something. Maybe you could just drink a bunch of Gatorade or something. Probably not overall healthy, but like, it doesn't literally need to be water, just to be clear. So even if that's true, okay, so that seems to me to just be a descriptive fact. And if you're going to use should language, bad language, so in other words, normative and evaluative language, in a way that is reducible to certain sorts of descriptive facts about what would be consistent with certain sorts of conditions that would only be met were certain actions taken, that seems totally anodyne to me. I don't have a problem with that. I'd say, okay, there are facts of that kind. You can call them moral facts if you want, but then that to me just becomes this sort of act of labeling. Now, if you want to say that's an analysis that you're offering for how people speak in some particular linguistic community, okay, well, now we have a empirical thesis about how some linguistic community uses a word. Again, that's fine. I would be fine with that. But like, it doesn't seem to me that it's doing the sorts of things that I would have wanted out of a robust moral theory. And you could say, well, who cares what you want? Well, I can tell you what I'm looking for. So, a lot of moral realists want to say, hey, that there are these facts that have some sort of authority. They are in some sense binding. They tell us what we should do independent of our goals and values in a way that is supposed to have some type of clout or force or oomph. It's supposed to guide our actions. The kinds of descriptive facts that it looks to me like a lot of naturalists are proposing, like, hey, moral facts are just facts about cooperation. I don't think that they can respond well to be saying, okay, well, what if I don't care about cooperation? So, okay, hey, it would be moral to do this thing. Well, what does that mean? Well, it would promote cooperation. What if you don't care about promoting cooperation? You could just say, okay, then I don't want to do that, so I'm going to go do something else. That's all these facts. These facts are inert, in other words. They're motivationally inert. They have no sort of authority over our actions. And so if a naturalist is content with that and they want to call themselves a realist and say that there's moral facts, they're welcome to do that. But I'm going to believe in the same facts they do. And just, I don't care that they're called moral facts. It doesn't have that kind of authority, which is what I am motivated to reject. So to me, it ends up just being a way of using the same terms or labels like moral realism to refer to something that I find utterly inoffensive and I would already be inclined to endorse anyway. And I call this trivial for the same reason that if I said, hey, look, I don't believe in God because I don't believe in a like personal, supernatural, all powerful being that created the universe and does this and that and wrote the Bible, like dictated the Bible or whatever. And then someone says, okay, fine. But by God, I mean I mean love. So if you believe in love, then you believe in God. Let's just use the word God to refer to love. Well, I do believe in love. So now I believe in God. That just seems trivial. It's labeling. It's playing around with words. Okay. So that's everybody. Let me get to the halfway fallacy and talk a bit about that. I think I might need to take a very quick break before I do that. And then, yeah, it doesn't look like I'm going to have time to bring people onto the chat today because I'm going to have to go early today, still with the post-surgery recovery. But I am going to take a quick break. I need like a cool song or something. Maybe I remember someone saying, I hate music and these sorts of things. I need something to do instead of the screen just going blank and me being silent, because I've had people go, hey, your video just cut out randomly in the middle of it. Like they get concerned. So I don't know what to do about that. Okay. So let me put this up and you can have a look at this. Is it one of my shorter ones? No, it actually is one of the longer ones, the halfway fallacy. Okay, I'm not going to read all of it then. I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm getting at with this. All right, so check that out. I'll put that up on the screen and I'll pin it. And I will be right back in like 1 minute. All right, I am back. Sorry about that. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes. So I got a couple options here. So I'll ask if the people are around that wanted to talk, would you want to talk for like 15 minutes? Because I could do that, and then I could just do the same thing I did for generalizing from the armchair, where I just do a part 2, and then talk about the halfway fallacy next week, and then we just talk for 15 minutes or something. That might be nice if we've never talked before. We just kind of, get some preliminaries out of the way for the next time that we do get a chance to talk. Alternatively, I could just talk a little bit about the halfway fallacy. I'm kind of inclined to go for the former if you're here, just because I feel like if I'm going to talk about the halfway fallacy, I should go all in and really talk about it. Great. So you want to come up and talk? Awesome. Let's do that. I will just say I did link and pin the halfway fallacy, and I'll just mention it real briefly so that people watching this video will not get the impression that I don't cover the topic at all. So just real quickly, here is roughly what the halfway fallacy is. Often, if you get into an argument in philosophy, awesome. Okay, so I'll post a link in a second. Anyway, so halfway fallacy. Often what will happen if you get into an argument in philosophy, and this, I'll give it in the context of realism. Let's say I'm a moral anti-realist, and a moral realist comes along and says, hey, you shouldn't reject moral realism. And I say, why? And they say, oh, well, companions in guilt arguments. If moral realism is false, then epistemic realism would be false. And you don't want to reject epistemic realism. So, you're going to have to accept both of them or neither of them. And you really don't want to accept epistemic realism, anti-realism. And then I say, okay, well, I reject epistemic realism too. Not a problem for me. You might be told that that's self-defeating. Well, if you reject epistemic realism, then you don't have any justification for rejecting epistemic realism or moral realism or anything else. So, well, why? Well, lurking in the background of this is the assumption that one would need stance-independent epistemic facts. In other words, the kinds of facts epistemic realists believe in order to be justified. And so, well, you can't do that. So then you are not justified in believing this. But if you're an epistemic anti-realist, you don't have to buy it. It's not like you're only rejecting. You're not going, hey, look, I agree with you that the only way you would be justified in believing something is if you had stance-independent epistemic facts. But I happen to reject that there are stance-independent epistemic facts. And so I believe you're not really justified in believing anything. That is a position you could take, but you could also take the position that there are no epistemic facts that are stance-independent, and stance-independent epistemic facts aren't needed to be justified. You could even say, look, I don't really care if someone they could stipulate or argue you would need to have stance-independent facts in order to be justified. That's just what is meant by justification. Then you could say, okay, well, then I reject your notion of justification. I'm going to stipulate my own alternative, schmustification, and I'm schmustified in believing in epistemic anti-realism. So now what are you going to do? What will often happen in these discussions is there's a presumption, and I think it's very frequently on the part of moral realists, and this probably happens in other sorts of domains in philosophy, is that if you take a skeptical or like an anti-position where you're rejecting some other position, there's often a presumption that you can only reject part of it, or you do only reject part of it, but that you have to accept other parts of it, or other presuppositions behind it. And then there's inconsistencies or problems that arise from that. And so you're stuck with these problems. But you can often reject those presuppositions or those other positions as well, and then it escapes the problem entirely. Now, someone might be incredulous at this or scoff at this, but in the interest of consistency, you're not obligated to adopt the middle way position. You can reject their whole framework for things, and this can often go, much deeper down. So, how can you believe things without justification? I think a lot of moves and a lot of the more deceptive things that go on in analytic philosophy are buried in the presuppositions behind the way a lot of people are using their terms. So I'll get into that next week. Let me, and do check out the blog post. And that's actually a cool thing that I could recommend that people do is to check out the blog posts first. And then if you want to talk to me about them, that would be a better thing to do because then you have context. Okay, so let me post a link here and then we could see if anybody wants to show up. Griff, you said you wanted to show up. What did you have something in particular to talk about? Just because I want to stay on topic. And this week it's really metaphilosophy, more generally philosophical stuff, and meta ethics and that kind of thing. If it's too off topic, I'm not going to want to talk about it. So if you want to ask about, I don't know, my views on some movie or some applied ethics thing, I might not want to talk about that. So it's usually good to have a, okay, great. All right, I posted a link. So feel free to check that out. I also want to be careful. So if you show up when you're backstage, hopefully, if you've got a camera so I could see you, people will get bizarre if they jump into channels before. I got to prevent, trolling and that kind of thing. And then Antonio, you could both join. I don't care. And then we'll have about, I'll say 15 minutes or so. Great. Oh no, it got muted. Yeah, so everybody could join. You're all welcome. I haven't seen anybody come backstage yet. So come on in. The link is working, right? Oh, I didn't pin it. There we go. It should be pinned now. Hey, welcome back.
Hello. Long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a while. So some of the other people, I think they're new. So if they want to show up and ask questions, is it okay if they take precedent? I mean, you're welcome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, we got one more. All right. So, Griff, were you planning on going on camera or do you want to remain off camera? You might be taking a risk, because I don't know if you're going to immediately start doing something. Who knows? Whatever. Let's give it a try. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Okay. Awesome. What's up? You had questions or things you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I'm pretty new to all of this.
Cool. All right.
Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
Okay. I'm pretty new to all of this, but I seem to find the same disagreements in pretty much every conversation. It sort of comes down to exactly what you were just saying before. And I just don't know, generally I lean towards moral realism, but I'm just not sure how to get beyond that disagreement, the exact one that you just mentioned. I don't know if that makes sense.
The halfway fallacy one?
Yeah, something sort of like that.
Okay, maybe if you give me more context, maybe I would have something to say about this.
Well, it feels like every time people have this debate, it sort of ends in the same way, and it sort of ends in the way that you are describing. And I'm not sure how to appeal to an anti-realist without sort of being circular, I guess.
I really think that's a concern. I don't think it's a concern just on the end of realists. I focus on my criticism on realists, but if a realist is going to push me, not on my anti-realist views, but they start pushing me on underlying epistemological views, it's going to bottom out in some sort of claims that I'm making that I don't think I could justify or I couldn't convincingly do so to them. So I'm going to end up running up against the same problem. And it really feels like if you go all the way to the roots of our differences, I'm not persuaded, and neither are they. And I don't know how to resolve that. And I'm not sure it can be resolved, but it's really frustrating.
Yeah, that's sort of why I brought up phenomenal conservatism earlier, because it feels to me that that's generally a point of agreement. Or not always, of course, maybe not in your case, but it seems like pretty much everyone eventually reverts down to seemings at the very bottom, at the very basic level. And maybe if everyone, I don't know how much more to say, but I think that's maybe sort of is a point of agreement. I don't know.
Yeah, I think where I differ from a lot of, because there's differences between the sort of meta ethics literature. So I'm mostly familiar with stuff in contemporary analytic meta ethics. I'm sure there's other discussions going on in other philosophical traditions. And then there's the whole, the way that people talk on Discord and in various forums and places online. And those might have a different flavor to them. My views on the realist anti-realist dispute are pretty unconventional with respect to the academic dialectic, like what's going on there. And part of the way in which they differ is that a lot of anti-realists will report having realist intuitions, or they'll think that they'll agree with realists that there's quite a bit going for moral realism, but that it's wrong in spite of the fact that it has quite a bit going for it. And this is where I differ from a lot of them. So you have like Jonas Olson in a recent discussion with David Enoch concedes quite a bit to Enoch, which isn't necessarily to say Olson is mistaken to do this. It's just that I don't feel inclined to make the same concessions. I don't have realist intuitions. In fact, insofar as I can make sense of what's being said about intuitions in a way that I don't find objectionable, I have very strong anti-realist intuitions. It's actually one of the things that's most obvious to me. And so that is actually probably somewhat unusual, at least in academia. I think a lot of anti-realists would just be like, whoa, really? I have the realist intuitions. I just think they're mistaken. But I don't even have those.
I think your position is pretty consistent. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I haven't watched, too much, but I think a lot of people's anti-realist positions are not, and that's why I think I don't have very much to say because of the problem I said earlier. And it seems like your positions are pretty consistent, and they don't fall, guilty, companions in guilt or any of these sort of common disagreements. And I'm not classically trained or anything, so I don't have that. I haven't experienced that many philosophical dialectics before, but I think that most anti-realists, purport to not having realist intuitions, and I'm not always convinced by that. I think that some people, a lot of people agree on the very most basic moral intuitions, and then they have disagreements on, where and when to apply them, and sort of disagreements on a more descriptive level. But I think in most cases, people purport to having the same fundamental, categorical intuitions, and it seems like you don't even purport to have those. And so it's sort of hard. I don't know. I just don't have anything.
Have you watched anything on my channel before?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so yeah, one thing I would say about this is that, and you may already be aware of this, is just that my primary academic training is in psychology, and I actually don't think that the psychological evidence indicates that most people have realist leanings. I think it's unclear whether they have any particular leanings at all. I suspect, and this is something that, the title of my dissertation is Schrodinger's categories, and it's a bit of a play on words, but what I end up saying there is that until people engage in philosophy, they don't have determinate philosophical positions when it comes to metaethics. And I think the same applies to a bunch of other philosophical issues like free will and that sort of thing. And so what I say is that whether a person is a realist or an anti-realist is kind of like a philosophical wave function that's only collapsed by engaging in philosophy. And a lot of philosophers will say, okay, but look, people don't have to have a determinate view or be aware of what it is if they had one implicitly before they study philosophy. But in my experience, when you explain things to people and you talk to them about it and you ask them questions, like you ask someone, look, do you think murder is wrong? And someone goes, yes. And then you say, well, do you think it would be murder wouldn't be wrong if like everybody agreed that it was okay? And then they say no, and you go, boom, done. You're a realist. I mean, you're intuitively inclined towards it at least. I think that's way too quick. And there's a few problems with that. One is, even if people do give those kinds of responses, well, which people? The people you happen to talk to? Okay, well, one, you're getting unsystematic anecdotal data. Two, this is presupposing that people understand the questions. Three, it's presupposing that the way in which the questions are framed is diagnostic of the person's metaethical views, which I think in all of these cases, they're serious. I don't accept the presuppositions. I think there's problems with them. Four, how representative of these people of people around the world and people historically? Who knows? Probably not very representative. People that are going to talk to you about philosophy are already self-selecting into a category of people that are very unlike most people. At least they could be, and we don't know otherwise. So you're going to have all these representation problems if you're trying to just think, what are most people like? If you ask me what are most people like, I'm going to think about people I've interacted with. The people I've interacted with are mostly people in the US that are native English speakers from weird populations. Are those the only people I've interacted with? No. But, if you were living in, I don't know, ancient Greece or, China 3,000 years ago, or Mesopotamia, or like I don't know, the Babylon or something, those people would have been very different than people today. Because like you could mention like super brutal things, and then they'd be like, yeah, that's how life is. Whereas we would be like, oh my god, this is horrifying. Anyway, my point is, when people are reflecting on a lot of this stuff, I think that they're just not careful enough to appreciate the degree of human diversity that's out there, and I think they need to be more attentive to that at the very least.
Yeah, and I assume you mean the same thing, like linguistically, with regard to cognitivism and people's. I think I've heard you say that before as well.
Oh, absolutely. So there is something maybe a bit shy of 7,000 languages currently in the world, maybe it's 6,500, something like that. How does, like, we're assuming that every language is going to use moral discourse the same way, based on what? What is that based on? I think the answer is it's not based on anything. It's based on presumption on the part of philosophers. And it's a presumption that I think is, I don't want to say it's an arrogant presumption, because I don't think it's motivated by an unjustified sense of superiority. I think it's motivated by certain theoretical commitments about the way language works that I think are simply false.
Yeah.
And, it's possible that languages don't even lexicalize distinctively moral terminology. How would we know unless we went and looked? Look, the bottom line is, I'm an empiricist, and facts about how people in other languages speak are empirical questions. And you would need to do the appropriate anthropology and comparative linguistics and that kind of thing to find out. You're not entitled to presume that because you think away in one language, everybody thinks away in another language. Anyway, just my point with all of this is, in a certain context, that might be unusual, which is among contemporary analytic philosophers, but that is a highly insular, homogenous, and rather small group of people. And so, so what? I'm unusual with respect to them. Well, pretty much any member of any Christian denomination is unusual with respect to members of every other Christian denomination that's not similar enough. So what? I don't think that tells us very much. Anyway, I'm saying too much.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Maybe we can talk more later, more sweepingly, I think. But maybe I would say that there does seem to be a pretty consistent fundamental set of, maybe I'm totally off base, but I feel like generally throughout most of history, throughout the whole world, there does seem to be at least some consistent, like, core basic moral beliefs, and then certain cultures or certain people, choose when and where to apply them. So you can look at, like, you do psychology, like in group and out group. So people would, choose to, not to apply, certain moral beliefs to people of an out group, or, to some respect, somebody other than themselves, or someone that's not proximal to them, but they still might hold those moral beliefs for people that are close to them. And so it isn't even really truly a moral disagreement that they're having, but more of, maybe it is, but maybe it's just of a different kind. I don't know.
Well, so I agree with that, but the fact that throughout history, and let's just assume for the sake of argument, even, never mind that I think we both probably agree as a matter of empirical fact, this is true, that if you looked in most human societies, there would be at least some convergence in some of the moral standards that they have. So you're probably not going to find too many societies where people think that it would be more like, it would be okay for a person to just wantonly commit violence against other people just for recreational purposes. Like they just run around with an axe and just go, I'm going to just chop people. Like is there any society where people would find that remotely acceptable? I bet the answer is literally zero in all of human history. There's no society that would have been okay with that. Maybe there's an exception. I don't think that I wouldn't be shocked beyond belief if we found one society where they're just super duper violent, but I suspect probably not at all. But what that is that's shared normative moral standards. That doesn't tell us anything about what they think about the nature of morality, or whether they think about the nature of morality at all. I mean, we could say the same thing about human food preferences. If you look in different societies, you're not going to find a whole lot of people like eating feces and eating really disgusting things. People everywhere are going to want salt in their food. They're going to like certain flavor combinations. They're going to have basically shared gastronomic values or attitudes. But we wouldn't be inclined to think that these people all think that there are objective facts about what food is good or bad.
Well, there might be some objective truth to the fact that people enjoy food that has salt in it, or people don't enjoy food that is feces. I think I wouldn't, make any sort of sweeping claims as a moral realist. I never would, about humans being, infallible in their application of the moral truth that they have access to. I think that's, I would never make that claim. I think that if people do have access to moral truth in some, seeming, seeming reducible way, I don't know, that they still aren't capable of truly actualizing like the totality of them. Like they might have, so many different psychological biases that might come, might harm their ability to actualize them. They might, have this sort of, the one I just proposed, the in-group out bias, or, any sort of bias, but that there does seem to be, maybe something that we all sort of have access to, maybe.
That might be true, but I would just take those to be descriptive facts about our shared psychology, not the kinds of facts that I think non-naturalist realists believe in. I think we got to wrap it up there because I'm already a little over time.
So I'm sorry.
At least 2 or 3 minutes. No. There's nothing to apologize for. I brought everybody in at the last minute just because I was like, to hell with it. Let me do the halfway fallacy. We'll go into more detail next week. So at least we've started a conversation and we can continue it in future streams. And I really appreciate you coming in here because I really want to make this more interactive. There's only I can ramble for hours and hours. There's only so much rambling I could do before it gets super stale. So these conversations are way better. Let me see if our other guests, do either of you have questions or anything? I got about 3 or 4 minutes.
I have a quick comment.
Sure.
If Antonio, I believe, wants to say something, you should go first.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say I don't think we'll be able to get into it in 3 minutes, so it's fine. We can do that next time. No worries.
Okay. Do you have a question? Because maybe it's something I could think about, and then that would make it easier the next time we talk.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, okay. Yeah. The way I would try to present my I guess concern in like a 1 minute pitch is, we do have this moral language game that most of us at some points in time sort of want to engage in. And it seems to me like the way I understand metaethics is as a way of trying to make sense of what we're doing when we engage in it. And of course, that doesn't mean everyone sort of is doing the same thing when they engage in it. But it seems like at least we to even be able to talk to each other about it, we do need like some shared rules about it, right? So some sense of sort of what moves are allowed in this language game, and sort of, what does it count? I mean, not that there needs to be someone winning it in any way, but like, sort of how does the moral dialectic progress? And I mean, to me, honestly, both realists and anti-realists sort of have problems in sort of accounting for that. So I'm not, and certainly like the kind of thing that is called realism in modern analytic philosophy is something that I agree has a lot of problems with it. But I would argue, or at least it seems to me, that there are equally serious problems with some anti-realist accounts of moral language, where it seems like if we're to take literally the claims of, for example, error theorists, I don't know like how we can actually play the games after we've accepted error here, right? So that's the sort of thing that I'd like to get into when we have time.
Awesome. Yeah. So that'll make for a good conversation. One thing I could just say now is that I reject all of the standard forms of anti-realism. So I reject expressivism, non-cognitivism, error theory, relativism, constructivism. I reject all of them.
Right.
And that is another thing that puts me in a really weird camp. So I think that they do have problems, and I could talk about what those problems are. So when we talk about this, this is something that's going to be fun for me in the future, which is to argue with other anti-realists, because I disagree with all of them too. So we might actually find quite a bit of common ground.
And no, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why it was a little like combative when I started commenting is because I saw you attacking like only the realist side of the debate, and it felt to me like, well, first of all, your semantic critique is equally applicable to error theory as to more real.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's why I reject error theory. And which just makes it really weird when people try to insist I'm an error theorist. And I'm like, I can't be an error theorist any more than I could be a realist for quite similar reasons, actually.
Yeah, right. And I guess in the team sports of online philosophy, you get grouped with these people. And I guess, I mean, you have been arguing mostly against moral realism, which I understand, of course. But that's, and I mean, your channel is explicitly like presented as arguing against moral realism. So that's sort of why I wanted to sort of, I guess, maybe take the critique to a more fundamental level, and we might agree that like there's a problem with how we set up meta ethics in general, and maybe like to actually be able to ground moral language properly, we need to like get past this idea of first of all starting with sort of folk semantics as we've been doing. Maybe that's not the right approach, like or at least if we do, like, okay, to be honest, I think to the extent I'll lean in any direction with regard to moral language, that might actually be closer to the non-cognitivist account, except I don't think it's really a non-cognitivist account. Well, okay, we might need more time to really get
Yeah, we're going to need more time. I think that's good preliminary. Any final comments from anybody else? And then I'm going to wrap it up because I got 2 minutes.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll see you all next week or whenever you're around. And then I'll just open this up because I'll have more time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So see you around. Any last word from anybody?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's this book called Debunking Arguments in Ethics by the philosopher Hanno Sauer, who makes a similar point. And he says in chapter 4, he makes the point that there's actually remarkable convergence in morals across like most societies. So if you're interested, maybe you can check that out.
Yep. Yeah, I've only seen one interview with him before, and I don't know much else about his views besides that, other than I think I looked at like his academic page and it said something about being interested in like empirical stuff too. So definitely something to look into. My list of books and articles to read, though, is a mountain. So it's always tough to prioritize things in that list. But you feel free to like email me it or put it in the comments maybe, and then I could at least put it on the endless pile of stuff.
Good thing.
Appreciate it. I'm going to have to wrap it up there. I'm already 10 minutes past what I said I was going to do. So thanks everybody for being here. I'm glad that I decided to bring everybody in. I think that was better than if I just rambled about my blog post. So this is way better. Let's keep doing this. All right. So I'm going to boot y'all out of here so I can play the outro video. So take care, everybody. I'm not upset with you. I just got to remove you for the outro video.
Right.
So
Have a good one.
Yep. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for dropping in. So if you want to see more of these conversations, I know this was a short one. Like the video, subscribe, do all that stuff. And yeah, so I guess that's it for what I'm going to do today. And we'll be recording. Well, I'll be recording more videos like interviews and discussions with people. So you're going to see some more in that. A lot of that is being scheduled. And so you'll be seeing that. So next week, I'm going to have to update all the videos. You might have seen the thumbnails for the upcoming videos. I'm going to switch next week to Halfway Fallacy 2, or actually talk about it next week. And then that'll push everything back a week. So I'll have to update all that. All right. So take care, everybody. I will see you all later.